In part 5 of disk and file system management, we actually wrote a file system to the partition that we had created. Now our goal is to mount that partition so somebody can actually use it. What I've done is I've created a sales directory that we will use as the mount point for our new partition. This is one thing that Windows users, any user who's not been exposed to a Linux operating system or Unix, has to get used to. You literally graft whatever it is you want into the file system by creating a directory and then mounting that device or partition in that directory, and that gives everyone access to it. You can do the same thing in Windows. They have literally the function to mount a drive within a folder. Same exact function. Now we can do it two ways. We could either mount it manually with the mount command, or we can edit a file called etcfstab, which will allow us to make sure that the file system is always mounted when the system is rebooted. So let's take a look at the mount command for a second. So I'll type mount here, and you can see the various mount points that we have. Now, a lot of this may look like gibberish to you right now, but just bear with me a second and we'll walk through it. Here we can see where root is mounted. So we can see the actual dev file that's being mounted. So in the dev directory, in the mapper directory, there's a logical volume, and that is mounted on root. We can see temp is being mounted here, user is being mounted here, var, directories that we've seen throughout the class. And what we'll do now, get out of there, what we'll do now is actually mount it. So let me just go back in there, mount. What we don't see mounted in here is anything referencing SDB1. We do see SDA1, which is being referenced or mounted in the boot partition. So let's go ahead and go mount. Now, you may have to specify the file system type if you need to. I would try it without having to do this at first, because more than likely the system will recognize the partition if it's been labeled and formatted correctly. So I will run the mount command. This will actually mount the device that I want. So I'm going to say dev/sdb1, and I want to mount it in the sales directory. Press enter. Now I'll type mount again, clear my screen. And sure enough, at the bottom, we can see that dev SDB1 is mounted in sales. And now people can actually access the sales directory. I can share the sales directory. We can save files to the sales directory. And that's great. The only problem is if we want to mount it permanently, if we restart the system right now, the users are going to lose access to it. We want to make this permanent, and to make it permanent, you edit a file called etcfstab. Now, there are a couple of different ways we can actually reference this partition, this file system, in that file. And the easiest way to see the three different ways we can do it is to type the block ID. And with the block ID command, if I press, whoops, let's get rid of, that's too many block IDs here. So with the block ID command, and I'll say to dev SDB1, it actually shows us immediately the three different ways we can reference it. Here is the traditional tried and true way that you can reference it. And if you're ever in a situation where you just need to get a file system up and working, the dev designation is the easiest way to get that thing going. I also, when I created it, gave it a label. This is another way of mounting the file system. So this is the original way of mounting it. It has some reliability issues with modern environments because we have all this ability to swap things out, USB devices, all types of networking devices. We can move things around, and when we move partitions or drives around in Linux, they have a tendency to replace the dev designation with that one. So, 1 minute it could be SDB1, I take it out, plug something else in, now that thing's SDB1, and then I pick it back in. So it can have a lot of problems, especially if you're trying to keep it permanently mounted. So we can create this label. This was the answer to that originally. Create a label for it and mount it based on the label. And that's good. It's better than mounting with the SDB1 designation, but it's not the best. The best way to mount a device in etcfstab is to mount it with the unique UID or UUID identifier. That is what is referenced by the kernel for that particular partition. And that's pretty much wholly reliable when we're mounting something permanently. We can mount it at the command line using that too if we want to, but it's a little harder way to do it. So typically if I'm mounting something temporarily, I always use the /dev/SDB or SDA, whatever it is. But if I want it permanent, I use the UID file. So let me go in here and I will do a vi etc fs tab, open this up, and we can see some of the information. So once again, here's a perfect example. That /SDBA1 that we saw when we looked at mount is being mounted based on the UID in /boot. So that's a good use of the UID there. And it's saying here that it's mounting it as an ext4 file system. It's mounting with default options, which means it'll have read-write, user access. The users will be able to execute on this mounted partition. And then after that, we see a couple of numbers. This is kind of a legacy information here. This is saying if we're going to dump this or back it up to with the dump command, that will enable that to happen. And then after that, there's another number which is still important, and that's what will happen if the system crashes. If it crashes, are we going to check disk, and who gets checked first? And as you can see here, the one means that one gets checked first, and that always will point to the root partition. After that, root partition's been checked and verified. Then the other partitions will be checked. And then we have a bunch of zeros, which is, typically stuff we're not really concerned about, like swap being checked, or these virtual temporary file systems. We're not worried about them being checked either. So let's go ahead and add our little sales partition that we have here. So let me just Control minimize that down a little bit. And I'll type, I gotta get back in here. And we'll do the block ID just so I can make sure I have it. SDB1, there it is right there. I'm going to grab that again just to make sure I have it, because I'm definitely not typing that out. Copy, come back over here. Now I'm in here, I'll go down to the bottom of the file, press O, and I'll paste that in. And now all I have to do is literally reference where it'll be mounted, because that's the partition right there. So where is it going to be mounted? It's going to be mounted in /sales. What type of file system is it? Well, it's ext34. What options do I want it to have? I'll take the default options. And then I'm going to also say, don't worry about dump. Forget dump. And if you're going to check it after root's being checked. So once again, just to make this clear, I can use this designation, I could use the dev/SDB1 designation, or I could even use that label equals /sales designation. The UID is the best way to do it. And as you can see, it's not difficult to pull out of the system. Just copy and paste it and it works just fine. So we'll go in here, we'll save this, and we're going to type mount again. And sales is mounted, so what I want to do is unmount sales. So let's unmount. We'll use the umount, not unmount with UN. It's just umount. And I'll tell it to unmount sales. Then I'll run the mount command again to see if sales is there. It's not. Now what I want to do is have the system read the etc/fs tab file. I don't want to mount it manually. I want to test it to make sure it's always going to mount. And the easiest way to do that is to run the mount-a command. A basically says, go read etc/f tab, and whatever you see in there that's not mounted, mount it. And so hopefully what we should see is, when we look at this again, we should see the sales directory has been mounted. So let's press enter, clear my screen, type mount, and sure enough, down there on the bottom, there is the sales directory. So we were able to edit that file and permanently put that in there. Every time the system comes up, it will restart with that. Fantastic. Now there is one other thing that I want to show you, and there's lots of other options, but there were a couple of these that are really critical. The mount option. Let's say I wanted to temporarily mount this as read-write for some reason, or I want to mount it as non-executable. I don't want users to be able to execute binaries, or it's read-only and I want to mount it read-write. I can do that without having to unmount it. That's the key. Yeah, I can go unmount it and then edit etc tab and remount it again, but that's going to disrupt everybody or possibly cause an issue. So what I can do is I can go in here and actually remount it. So I can give the mount option remount, and I can say remounted read only. And I can say dev sales. So I can give it that information, press enter, and now if I type mount again, what we see at the bottom, so here it was just a second ago, and here it is now as read only. That mount option one is a lifesaver when you're in a rescue environment. Definitely one you want to write down, because a lot of times when you're in a rescue environment, you end up in a read-only file system. And you know what you need to do, but you can't do it because you can't edit it. So being able to actually mount that is amazing with that command. And the key to keep in mind, you can actually, I do want to show this to you. If, let's say you're in a rescue environment and you just need to get access to etc tab, and you know where etc tab is on what partition, and it's read only and you need to mount it, you can literally graft over something else. So I could say mount dev sdb1 in /boot. Now boot's already been mounted, it already has its own partition. What this will do, it'll literally just temporarily mount it in the boot partition for me. I can get in there in a rescue environment, do what I gotta do, get out, save it, make sure the system syncs and saves all the changes, get out, and the system comes back up. It'll mount /dev/sda1 in boot like it's supposed to. Pretty cool, right? So that's the mount command, and that's mounting. Once again, lots of things we can do with this. We also have network options also, which we'll look at in later classes. But that's the mount command. Next, we'll look at actually tweaking and what we can do with the file system and checking file system integrity with some of the other tools that are available.